Hello, and welcome to this Veeam Trailblazer Talk. My name is Scott Becker. I'm your moderator today from Actual Tech Media. Our topic today is Hybrid Cloud Protection Essentials with Veeam. Before we get to today's great session, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of the event. First off, I want to point out the questions box in our webinar control panel. That's the place to say hello and let us know where you're connecting from. It's also the place to let us know in the unlikely event that you experience any technical issues. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we will provide further technical assistance. Now, while we won't have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation today, we will make sure that we pass along any questions that you do have about hybrid cloud protection to the team at Veeam. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to a couple of valuable reports from Veeam. They're both 2023 trend reports. One is on data protection trends, and one is on cloud protection trends. These are great reports, very broad base of respondents, really valuable data. So grab both of those and check them out. There's also a valuable dummies book on hybrid cloud backup. So again, those are all available in your handout section. They'll be there through the whole session. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. They're both from Veeam. We have Dave Russell, Vice President of Enterprise Strategy, and Jason Buffington, Vice President for Solutions Strategy. So I'm going to turn things over to Dave. Dave, the floor is yours.
Hello and welcome to another Trailblazer Talks, our first of 2023. Here with my good friend and colleague, Jason Buffington. We're both in the office of the CTO. Jason, we're going to be discussing today hybrid cloud protection and essentials with Veeam, but it's not just a Veeam commercial, is it?
It's not. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the industry trends that are just driving hybrid cloud adoption. By the way, spoiler alert, hybrid cloud is not coming. Hybrid cloud is here. And so we're going to talk about then what that means for production and protection.
So what we thought we'd do is just kind of break this into a couple different parts. We're going to give you a kind of a view into a few different research documents that Veeam has commissioned. They're not Veeam customers, are they, Jason? This is industry-wide. I'll let you take it here for the setup on the first part, because you've really been spearheading, along with our colleague Julie Webb, the research we've done in a few different areas.
Yeah, so one of the things that's important about being a thought leader is to really understand where is the market going and what should we be building and how do we deliver those capabilities. And so Veeam contracted last year, I think, just short of 10,000 unbiased blind IT leaders. So we use third-party independent research houses. These are not Veeam customers in the survey panel. They don't know it's Veeam who's asking the questions. They go out and ask a lot of different questions on what are you doing? What are you trying to do? What features matter? And then what do you think you're going to do moving forward? And we use that for product strategy, and we use it for education events like this.
Yeah, so let's jump in a little bit. This is one that we really liked for some time. It supports your opening thesis, Jason, about, are people actually pursuing hybrid cloud currently or not? This comes from the industry's largest ever research, the data protection trends. We try to source everything in the lower left-hand side. You can see a short URL, meaning VEE.am/DPR23. Towards the end of the research area, we'll show some QR codes as well, but every slide will have this at the bottom. It's pretty easy. DPR 23 just means data protection trends 23. 4,200 respondents, Jason. What did they tell us about hybrid cloud infrastructure?
Yeah, so we've been watching this meta trend for quite a while. Every year we ask organizations what percentage of your physical servers are either virtual machines, which is of course where we come from, physical machines within the data center, which every organization still relies on, and or cloud hosted. What I think is interesting about this data is we're only seeing about 1 to 2% variation year over year. We saw a big shift at right after COVID, but now it's really just in that fine points. And if you're taking notes, here's two things to take away. The modern IT strategy today is roughly 50-50 on-prem versus cloud hosted, as you can see here. And then within the data center, it's about 50-50 between physical and virtual. So the modern environment is wholly hybrid.
Yes. And we should mention that we also asked the question, what do you think your mix will look like in the following 2 years, meaning into the future? It's not radically different, Jason. So to your point, this hasn't changed in 2022 and 2023. And it's not expected to change in 2025.
Yeah, the last material shift was really when COVID happened, right? You couldn't
Yep.
get in the data center, you couldn't get new metal kit. Everyone who said, "Hey, we need to do more cloud," they just stomped on the gas for that one and accelerated that. So there was a hockey stick from 20 to 21, and then since then it's 1 to 2% variations. Data center is not going away, but oh, by the way, the cloud is absolutely here. And that's going to kind of set up the rest of our conversation for today.
Yeah, brilliant point. So one of the other questions we asked is, what is enterprise? I know some of this font can be small, another good reason to download the report, but we'll give you the key takeaways. And Jason, when asked, what does enterprise backup mean to you? If your organization was considering a new enterprise backup solution today, which attribute would be most important? The longer bars are check all that apply. No surprise, the shorter bars are stack ranking the single or most important item. Again, a sample size of 4,200 from 28 countries. Near and dear to the topic of today in our Trailblazer discussion now, cloud rose to the top, didn't it?
It did. And honestly, I think the top two really are saying the same thing, right? So the top one says, I need to be able to protect IaaS and SaaS. And remember, the question is, if you are buying something new, what's the main thing you'd be looking for, right? It'd be like, Dave, a couple of years ago, you moved from Arizona up to Colorado. If I were to ask you what's the number one thing that you're probably looking for in your next vehicle, it's something that would be snow worthy, right? You need something for those tires, right? And so in this case, if you went 15 years ago and asked, what are you doing when everything was physical? The number one option would be, I need to back up these new VM things because my legacy stuff ain't working. Fast forward 15 years, that's what we're seeing is the number one buyer because your legacy backup solution is probably working just fine on the legacy data center workloads. What it ain't working just fine on is IaaS and SaaS. And I think that's why the top two answers are adjacent, is because the legacy stuff isn't working on those modern workloads. And so you are suffering reliability. I would argue 28%, the top two combined, 1 out of 4 organizations trying to solve how do you protect cloud hosted modern workloads.
Yeah, well, it's a great point and a great setup for the next question when we asked, what do you think is modern? Again, same survey, same sample, 4,200. Which would you consider to be the defining aspects of a modern or innovative data protection solution for your organization? Same notion, check all that apply in the longer bars, in the shorter bars, what's the most important? We've shaded this for you just to show the cloud items rose to the top. And in aggregate, Jason, the cloud items nearly dominated the response.
Yeah, I think, and this was mostly true last year, but it's absolutely true this year. When you say modern data protection, we should be thinking modern is really a synonym for cloud capable, right? The trick, though, is there's a lot of different ways that cloud works, right? So there's cloudy production, and then there's cloudy protection, right? So can I use the cloud as my DR site so I don't have to have secondary infrastructure? Can I protect what's in the cloud? But Dave, actually, the thing which I am most delighted by, I always just am amused by this, is take a look at, it's the second highlighted one down. And this is one that, I know you have some passion around, the ability to move from one cloud to another, because that's not trivial. And it's
Yes.
also not ubiquitous in our industry.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, Jason and I like to make the point the cloud is not one thing, and we'll decompose that a little further in the presentation. But one aspect of what the cloud can be is needing to go from one hyperscaler to another, maybe to move without knowing in advance that that was going to be the case. We'll take a look at in just a little bit about why people may want to move on-prem to cloud or cloud back to on-prem. But you're right, Jason, this idea, especially in this example, because the example is Amazon to Azure, moving from a Linux-based environment to a Windows-based environment requires some conversion or translation.
It does. And if you think about it, every hyperscale cloud is going to give you a little podunk utility that will get you from physical or from virtual on-prem into their cloud, right? But it's a Hotel California problem, right? You can check out, you can never leave. You're not going to get that data back out, right? Because that's not in Amazon's interest. It's not in Azure's interest, right? So if you want to be able to move from one to another, but it is in the customer's interest, which is kind of unfortunate, because if I'm a CIO or a CFO, and I say, hey, I love that the devs were using Amazon and that sounds really cool, but I got all these Azure credits every month because I'm using M365. I want production to go over there. How am I going to do that? You can't do that with a utility from either side. You're going to need to actually do something that's used to making copies of your stuff and then reinstantiating it someplace else, either reactively because of something crisis or proactively because the CFO said so. And so I think that's a really interesting scenario. It also happens to be an area of differentiation for Veeam.
Yes, it does absolutely. Now, this one I know is near and dear to your heart. Jason is a strong proponent of backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service. But here we're asking a question around cloud-powered backup. We're looking at it over a multi-year period. We've been doing this research now for quite some time. One of the benefits is seeing year-over-year changes. Here, the question simply is, which is your primary method of backing up today, and which do you anticipate will be your primary backup method in a few years, 2 years exactly? The benefit, of course, Jason, of now having done this for multiple years is in 2020, when we first started this research, when we asked, what are you going to do in 2 years? We already have the actuals now for, in this case, 2022. Same from 2021 to 2023. But walk us through the results, because the color scheme may look a little interesting here, but the light green bars are getting bigger compared to the darker green bars.
Yeah, so it's our fourth year in a row to ask the question, what are you doing now? And each year we also ask that 2-year gap. So the 24 came from what 22 thought they were going to do. The 25 came from what they thought 23 was going to do. When we talk about cloud-powered backup, the instructions actually to the respondent was that would include both enhancing your on-prem backup solution with cloud capacity, right, for that secondary tiering or offloading of on-prem data. Great for DR, great for long-term retention. And then also as a managed service. But so is the cloud part of your solution or not? And what I think you see a couple trends. The first one is take a look at 21 to 22 to 23, and you can see we're not seeing a whole lot of shift, right? So it's roughly 2 out of every 3 environments has the cloud as part of their data protection strategy. The other trend to look at is when you look at, say, 22 versus 24, there's about a 13-point aspirational swing. They want to do more. Okay, they didn't make as much progress between 1 year and the next, but when you look 2023 to 25, same thing. They aspire to do more. So the intent is better than 2 out of 3 environments have the cloud as part of their data protection architecture today. And the anticipation is yet even more are going to do that over time. And frankly, for all the right reasons, I think they're making good choices there.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. Let's see if I did it. I tried to change the color scheme for the next one, which is going to focus on cloud-powered disaster recovery. Yeah, I got a black instead of a white font to make it a little bit more readable. Now, I love one of your phrases, Jason, why BAS when you can DRAS? Maybe decompose that a little bit, and then we can decompose these results.
I've actually got that on a coffee mug just because that is so important to me. Coffee is the lifeblood of every IT professional, after all. Yeah. So, okay. So when we talk about the differences between BAS and DRAS, I personally believe that market's going to continue to conflate together, because the bottom line is what people are saying is I want to put an agent on my production infrastructure, wherever that might be, on or off-prem. I want to suck that data to a different location, and I want that second location to have experts more than me. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room anymore, right? And so so what do you really need to have DR? You need secondary capability and you need expertise beyond just backup admin, right? You get those two things and you get DR. And I think that's what this slide is really saying. So when you look on the bottom of the slide, that's, self-managed data centers, and we love, if you have East Coast protecting West Coast and vice versa kind of thing, there's some real power and agility that comes out of that. But market-wise, that organizations that claim that is 30, 28, 34, 30, 24, 20, roughly 30% give or take, and a slight dwindle. But Dave, take a look at the lime green on top where they're using the cloud as part of their DR strategy. 23, 30, 36, 53, 55. Over a 4-year span, better than double the number of organizations are leveraging the cloud as part of their DR. And honestly, you and I being old timers on this, take a look at the white numbers on top. This is the percentage of organizations that now have a BCDR capability. So this is accelerating everybody's ability to be resilient. And I'm so excited for the industry for that. But it's because the cloud is where that growth is. Do I have a secondary site when I didn't used to have one? And do I have smarter humans than me that know how to spell BCDR? And for a lot of folks, that means drafts.
Yeah, and I like this chart as kind of a bit of a microcosm into everything we see with cloud, meaning on-prem or self-managed, not going away, not going to zero, but more investment happening in cloud capabilities. To your point as well, I like the democratization, I'll call it, around all organizations being able to afford this. Even myself in my home lab, I'm able to not only back up on-prem and multiple types of media, but to electronically vault. That's cost attainable for me. I think it's cost attainable now for a variety of businesses around the globe. It's putting people, to your point, in a better position for availability.
Absolutely. And that's what we all want, right? Even the smallest of small businesses rely on their data, right? But they didn't have the options of BCDR up until a few years ago because they didn't have a secondary site, and they absolutely could not spell BCDR. No offense. But now with cloud, you get those democratized infrastructure, and you have experts on tap when you need them. And so I'm excited for what the industry is, and especially for those organizations that now have that capability.
Yeah, and I'll double click on sort of a bonus item for people watching out there. This comes from our data protection trends. We also have a cloud protection trends that we're going to highlight for people. And when we talk to people about cloud protection, particularly disaster recovery, Jason, a lot of times people said, I'm interested in disaster recovery, but I may not have the expertise. And it's possible they were also saying, I may have the expertise. It's just Joe or Jane are incredibly busy doing many other things.
Very fair.
What I really need is someone to understand, for example, networking, whatever the case may be, to actually come up with a full-fledged business continuity disaster recovery plan versus Baz, pointing to the cloud as a target. That's valuable, but relatively easy to do for most organizations. The thing I like about DRAS, if you will, disaster recovery as a service, is you're importing skill as well as technology.
Yeah, let me break that down for you. So I was actually a certified business continuity planner in one of my last lives. And so when you think about, okay, what's the backup admin need to know and do really well? Okay, so I have to understand all the production infrastructure, understand how to protect that data. I need to understand what the business requirements are for long-term retention, and I need to be able to have an architecture that's scalable and doesn't impede the production environment. And those are all valuable backup skills. When we take that and look at what DR requires, I need to have a business level understanding of what are the critical business processes, and then be able to determine from that what IT systems do they depend on. I need to be able to figure out what the dependencies are between that overall IT architecture perspective. Then I need to be able to figure out how do I get that data off site. Then I need to be able to actually build a plan that says, okay, so what tiers and prioritization do I need to bring that stuff back up online? How do I transform those workloads from one architecture like on-prem to another architecture like cloud, right? And then when everything goes bad, most good BCDR plans presume the original architects of the plan are no longer available. That could be loss of life. That could be just lack of availability. You got a flood downtown. I got a flood in my house. I ain't coming into work today, right? But whatever it is, now I have to be the one who's pulling those triggers under the auspices of the organization's leadership. All of those are skills that are very hard to hire for, hard to train for, and very expensive to maintain on staff. All of those are skills that you get when either a DRaaS a cloud provider or arguably a Veeam advanced services provider, a VASP or GSI might become involved. But those skills, that's what's going to unlock these capabilities.
Well said. Well said. No, we think about cloud, even though containers, Kubernetes can be run on-prem, it's often associated with cloud or cloud native technologies. So the thing I wanted to decompose here is just a little bit of, you made the point, hybrid cloud is already reality. It's already here, Jason. And I think I'd say the same about containers. The reason I really like highlighting this one is if you talk to, I'll say, the traditional infrastructure operations teams, the server teams, the backup professionals, the storage administrators, their view typically is something along the lines of containers are probably coming, they'll be in production in about 2 years. And you talk to the app dev or the DevRel team, and they're thinking, well, yeah, containers have been in production for about 2 years. So you've got this 4-year gap of part of the organization thinks they're already in production. The other part of the organization thinks that, yep, it might be important someday. It's probably coming soon or maybe in a couple of years even. Not unlike what we saw with the vSphere environments, hypervisor environments some years back. But this question, and I appreciate the font's a little small, so we'll just read it out to you. It's simply, how would you describe your organization's adoption of containers? It's about 2,100 respondents. The reason it's not that full 4,200 is we just filtered down to please only respond if you have a detailed knowledge of your organization's container activity. So I like taking the exceptions, meaning the boundary conditions, Jason, just to do a little myth bust. The tiniest sliver of response at noon, basically 12 o'clock, said, we don't plan to run containers. That was 1%. Yeah. Only 1% out of nearly 2,100 respondents. 8%, if we start moving counterclockwise, the next smallest band, only 8% said, well, we're not yet in our deployment plan, but we're interested. And then maybe walk us through where the lion's share came from, meaning where's that other 92%?
Yeah, 92% are drinking the Kool-Aid, man. I mean, 52% already running in production, the other 40% planning. Dave, I just keep thinking back to my heart used to break 20, 25 years ago when people would come up, when admins would come up and say, hey, the marketing server is down. And I'd be like, what marketing server? And they'd take me into their offices and it was sitting underneath one of their desks. And I didn't know it was there. So I hadn't been backing it up. And now it was down. Right. And so you see this model where there is a break between those folks that are really relying on some of these next gen platforms and core IT who doesn't realize how in production this stuff is. And so, yeah, if you're a backup admin and you're watching this, I promise you, there's probably a lot of containers under that virtual or cloud hosted desk. It needs to be part of your backup strategy because what you don't want is a conversation of, I got to pull something back. And it's like, but I haven't been backing it up because I didn't know. And you didn't know because you didn't ask.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've been at Veeam almost 5 years. Prior to that, when I was a Gartner analyst, I want to say it's almost 8 years ago at one of the Gartner conferences. Ironically, one of my networking colleagues, a networking analyst on stage, said, again, this is at least 7 years ago. I believe it's 8 years ago. His statement was, raise your hand. This was probably like 300-400 people in the audience. Raise your hand if you think you've got containers in production. Almost nobody's hands went up. So he said, really? Raise your hand if you have developers. 100% of hands go up. He goes, hey, I got news for you. This is, to your point, Jason. If you have developers, you already have containers, and I guarantee some amount that's not currently under your purview or your knowledge are in production as well. Yep. So this is not unlike, again, history repeating itself from, say, a vSphere hypervisor environment. I used to get those discussions in the 2006, 2007 timeframe where essentially the backup administrator said, I woke up and went to work on a Monday, and suddenly the server administrator said, these 100 VMs are now your responsibility. And I said, what 100 VMs?
Yes,
So
that is real life.
surprises happened. That's really the goal of some of these data points is maybe some of this is just reaffirming what you intuitively thought to be the case. In other cases, this is data you can use in conversations with those in your data center. Now, if you're really good at math, you're going to notice around this circle here, it technically adds up to 101%. That's just due to rounding. But the other thing that I want to point out, you see our first QR code. This is a little bit of a commercial ahead of our discussion about Veeam, but almost 3 years ago, Veeam acquired a company called Kasten that specializes in Kubernetes backup and recovery. We'll talk more about that a little bit later, but there's a QR code into that. So Jason, let's myth bust containers just slightly more. Another sort of thought besides was containers really happening? Is it really in production or not? Is maybe containers is just the domain or of interest to very, very large organizations. Is that true?
It is not. Look, like everything else, new technologies, especially disruptive platform shifts, always start with the enterprise, right? They have deeper expertise. They tend to have slightly higher budgets. They tend to be more aggressive on cutting edge technologies because they know where it's going to transform their business. And then, like everything else that we've seen before, from snapshotting through continuous replication, storage management, all of those technologies eventually commoditize downstream into commercial and then ultimately into small business. And at some point along that inflection, you see mainstream, right? And so that's what you're seeing here is that, yes, enterprises, they're 54% in production versus the others that you see 39, 7, and 1. That's the rightmost bars. And this commercial, they're only 46, barely less than half, 39%, so better than a third of small businesses. So that shift is going to be led by the enterprise, but like every transformational shift ahead of it, you should expect that SMBs are going to catch up as the tools continue to commoditize and trust builds through the mainstream.
Excellent point. So winding down with a couple other data points, let's shift to SaaS. I'm actually going to save kind of what I'll call the poster child example of software as a service for a second. Jason, I know you and our product management marketing person, Allison, did an entire webinar recently on Salesforce protection. We actually did an entire piece of research on Salesforce protection. Maybe tell us just a little bit about that research, which we're highlighting here in the bottom left, but also what is this data point telling us?
Yeah, as we said earlier, one of the key goals of all the strategic research that comes out of Veeam is really making sure that we understand the market. What should we be building and why? And so when we decided that we wanted to bring a Salesforce backup solution to market, it was important for us to understand, just like we did with virtualization 15 years ago, just like we did with M365 5 years ago, IaaS admins also about that same time frame, what is it that Salesforce folks who aren't traditional IT pros, who aren't traditional backup admins, what matters to them? And so this particular survey, first of its kind, actually had 800 folks where we actually surveyed Salesforce developers, Salesforce admins, and backup admins to look at, do they agree and disagree on the reasons why and what you should be getting out of Salesforce backup? And then, oh, by the way, making sure that our product aligns with those marquee goals. In this case, one of the things that was interesting was we didn't see what you typically see in traditional IT pedigree around cyber and DR and those kinds of things, because Salesforce is so data intensive, right? It's about that quality of the data. And if you've been in an organization that uses a CRM tool at all, you know that preach that you hear every couple of months is data hygiene. The data has to be right. And so it makes sense that for an enterprise grade capable for Salesforce backup is going to be about protecting against human error, protecting against bad data ingest, corruption, bad schema, bad extensions, but it's all around that human architecture, not necessarily the bad actors or the failed hard drives or those things that those of us in IT are used to. And yet, still got to back this stuff up.
Yeah, and what I love about, well, that was fantastic analysis, but what I love about just looking at these raw results, you see the long bars that clearly add up to probably like 250%. So
Right.
Everyone's worried about multiple things. And then you look at the short bars, what rises to the top? Well, It's a three-way tie for number one. If you want to say 1 point differential, it's a two-way tie for number two. And then you've only got a 1 or 2 point differential before you get down to, if you want to call it 3 or 4. So a lot of different people looking for many different things. And to your point, it's because you have very differentiated roles.
Yeah.
But that's Salesforce. Now let's look at what, again, I'll call the poster child, Microsoft 365.
Boom.
There, unlike Salesforce, where we're not as much worried about bad actor or worried more about mistaken person.
Yeah.
Cyber attacks, unfortunately, are targeting M365, and it's because so many of us participate in some portion or several components of M365. It's where the data lives. It's where a lot of people have a lot of access. Jason, I don't know if any of these numbers scare you, but if I'm just going to build this out, because here's where it gets really scary in my mind. Where did that roughly 80% come from? Look at this on the left. Everyone can probably read the left hand. I'm sorry. Look on the right. Everyone can probably read the left-hand side. It's overwhelming where the number of exploits are compared to some other areas.
Yeah, and if you think about it, a couple of things about this that kind of make this problem so challenging. One is the near universal use of M365. Why is anybody standing up an Exchange server anymore, right? As a mail platform. And oh, by the way, for the most part, we're not seeing near the adoption of, say, Google Suite or the other mail tools anymore. I mean, it's almost universal from everybody's using it kind of perspective. Also, the other thing is that a lot of key platforms, you intentionally harden the experience between the consumer client and the server infrastructure that you're leveraging. But here, the whole point is collaboration, right? And so the architecture is designed to receive from the outside. It's part of the goal. And so that means that there's a broad attack surface there. And I got to give props to Microsoft. They continually try to harden that. But once it's in the content stream, right? Once you have that mail message from that Nigerian prince or from that, click here for sale or whatever that is, that is your business. And once you as an authorized user click on that, you have given the keys to the kingdom to the bad actor. And yeah, it's super scary and super relevant for everything we're talking about today.
Yeah, perfect. And that's a great transition. I'm going to leave this next slide up for a little bit because we have riffed on a bunch of different research. There's a couple of these that we've also highlighted in the downloadable materials, but I'll pause here. And Jason, maybe just walk us really quickly or remind us in some cases, these 4 key pieces of research we're highlighting.
Yeah, so the one that I think we're most excited about is the most recent one that shipped. It's in that lower right-hand corner, data protection trends for 2023, right? So largest of its kind, actually third year in a row, we've been able to claim largest of its kind. 4,200 unbiased organizations, 28 countries around the world. A lot of the data that you've seen comes from that. We kind of treat this report as the tips of many icebergs, right? We get a little bit of cyber, a little bit of container, a little bit of cloud, and it helps us understand where the overall industry is going. And then we double click one scenario at a time on the things that really matter that are driving conversations and what customers are asking for. So we talked about the Salesforce one, that's in the upper right-hand corner, right? We talk a lot about cloud. We're going to spend the rest of our time talking about that as well. And again, we wanted to understand how the personas agree or disagree. So we looked at IaaS admins, PaaS admins, SaaS admins, and compared those results with IT operations generalists and backup specialists. That's the cloud protection trends in the lower left. And then honestly, the funnest report that I enjoy is the ransomware trends report. This one's really hard. We have a third-party organization that goes out and finds 1,000 organizations, all of whom have been hit successfully at least once in the past 12 months. So not being customers, or I guess some percentage of them are, just like Commvault, Cohesity, Rubrik, Dell, IBM, Veritas, whatever. But the point is 1,000 organizations who actually were hit and taking the lessons learned from them, what worked, how they get in, how they beat it, what are they doing differently now. That ransomware trends is arguably my favorite report because it's so actionable moving forward.
Outstanding. So we're going to transition now in the time remaining and talk a little bit about Veeam, but I want to encourage you, even if you're not a Veeam customer or considering Veeam, consider some of what we're going to describe around Veeam capabilities as basically a way to update your decision framework or what you should be looking for when it comes to additional cloud-based solutions. At Veeam, we like to preach flexibility and choice, own your data, and do that on any different kind of cloud. If you haven't taken a look at Veeam recently, kind of the upper right-hand area in the virtual environment is certainly where Veeam first started, first made its name, added physical, added critical enterprise applications and unstructured data. Really what we've been talking about is in the upper middle and over on the left-hand side, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Kubernetes, and SaaS-based solutions like M365 or Salesforce. Jason, I'm going to be the straight man and set you up when we talk now, decompose a little bit about Veeam capabilities. It's in the cloud. Hyperscalers, they actually backing it, meaning it's their infrastructure, it's their management. So aren't they taking care of absolutely everything?
No, they're not. It would be lovely if they did, right? It'd be lovely if, Amazon backed up Amazon stuff and Azure backs up Azure stuff and Salesforce backs up Salesforce stuff and Google backs up Google stuff. And that all sounds lovely until you realize, oh, crud, now I'm using 25 tools, right? So that's one of many reasons. But the other side is that's not really their business model. Their model is to stand up infrastructure, to stand up services so that you can manage your data without managing the underlying components. And that underlying components is actually what you see on the bottom of the slide. So when you look at what's actually involved in an IT stack to deliver business data to business users, from a what part does the cloud cover versus what does the user still own is the green versus the blue. And in almost all cases, even if your cloud provider is backing up, they're not backing up so that you get previous versions. They're not backing up so you get regulatory compliance. They're backing up so that if one of their data centers burns down or floods, they can get your infrastructure back up within a couple weeks, right? Not the same thing as backup. So thank you for that. And now I'll stop opining.
Yeah, no, your point's extremely well taken. It is still your data. A very imperfect analogy, but one I like to use is it's no different than renting a car.
Yeah.
If you rent a car, it's still your responsibility not to drive it off the road. The car rental facility, they're going to make sure the car is operational, has gas, the oil, the tire pressure, these types of things. However, you're still the driver. Even if you consume it as, say, something like an Uber or a Lyft, or maybe it's a limousine even service, you still have to get the destination, the directions, the time. I mean, you're still responsible for some aspects of this. So it's not like you can just say, I blindly trust the hyperscaler. Obviously, they're in the business of keeping that infrastructure up. They're not in the business of making sure your business data has integrity, hasn't been compromised, hasn't been accidentally messed with, a schema dropped in Salesforce, what have you.
Man, that's a great analogy, Dave. I hadn't heard that one before, but I love that idea that, if you go to SaaS, it's like that Uber. You just get in, you consume it, everything else is turnkey. You could argue that even in IaaS, you're still patching the servers, right?
Yeah.
You're still putting in the gas, you're still checking the tires, you're still putting in the oil. Somewhere between we get PaaS. So what do we get there? That's when you get those really nice, high-end, expensive cars that I can't afford, and the dealer will actually do your oil changes and everything included for you. Oh, by the way, you're paying for that, but they don't really mention it at the time. I mean, so yeah, I love that example. Yeah.
One of the things we think is worth thinking about, and this is not just true of Veeam, although Veeam, we pride ourselves on this capability. It's very intentional that you see bidirectionality of the arrows, which represent data flows. So whether that starts off on-prem, goes to AWS or Azure, or say Google Cloud Platform, or back. Jason, one of the things that I really like to point out, in fact, maybe I'll save it. I might have the data point coming up. I'm going to quickly verify that. I do. So I won't steal my own thunder, but the notion, and you referenced it earlier, that you don't want to get locked into some other deployment model. You may want to develop in the cloud and go in production somewhere else. You may go into production into one cloud, but you get more favorable pricing, or maybe there's data sovereignty concerns in another. So you want to make a shift, and you want to be able to do that across multiple different workloads, be they hypervisor, be they physical, what have you. So in other words, I like to say you don't want that lock-in but it's really about choice.
It is. So my preferred term for this is hybrid fluidity. But for whatever reason, marketing is not buying in on that to go make T-shirts or hats for me. But the bottom line is that if we're trying to get the data out of one environment and put it into another, lock-in's the right word, right? And it's not a kind word, but it's the reality of don't put your stuff into any bucket that you can't move it out of later, because there's all kinds of reasons for both production and protection scenarios where you need to be able to have that in a portable, transformable, agile state along the way.
Well said. Well said. We'll go rapidly through the next few slides, but Jason, here, let's decompose the cloud. We've been saying in our live streams now taking place on Tuesdays that the cloud's not one thing, and the utilization of the cloud is not one thing either. So we're going to kind of riff through three different ways to consume the cloud. The notion that I was first mentioning about maybe stealing my own thunder, I'm going to give you a bonus fourth, but there's to the cloud, cloud hosted, cloud native. Now, Jason, you alluded to the cloud. There's a few different ways you can think about that, and I'm sure folks out there are clever enough to think of a fourth or fifth and more. One of them is just simply start directing your on-prem data towards a cloud tier.
Yeah, and for as long as we've been watching this space, for a lot of organizations, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, even when organizations first said, "Hey, I don't know what this cloud thing is," one of the first sentiments was, "I'm not sure I want to run production there yet, but I wouldn't mind at least backing up to it," right? So cloud storage as that first step along the way. And then invariably what happened is kind of like in VMs, I don't want to run production VMs yet, but maybe I could just, do from DR. And then what you figured out is this stuff runs pretty well on virtualization. Fast forward 10 years, this stuff runs pretty well in a cloud. Maybe I could run in production. And so usually there's a toe dipping in where backup and archive is a first use case in any platform. Then from there, hey, can I just light it up there as opposed to bringing it back down again? Then when you start seeing things like, hey, VMware on cloud, now that's really interesting because now I'm just not using that metal anymore. So I think it's a clean maturation shift. And we've seen that in platform after platform as an architecture over time, but kind of like VTL. Right? Seemed like a good idea at the time, but you weren't really getting all the value that you wanted out of treating disk like tape. Let's treat cloud like cloud, and that's going to set us up for the next part of the maturation journey.
Great point. Great point. Now, there's also cloud hosted. One way to view that is either infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and Veeam does have dedicated solutions, meaning purpose-built for the major hyperscalers, AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform. These are capabilities that are designed not only to handle workloads there, but in some cases, specific databases, either lifted and shifted or cloud native databases that exist there. They can also interoperate with our on-premises tools as well. Veeam writes data in a format such that it can be read and moved around from different locations. That could be hyperscalers or that could be from the cloud to back on-prem. But another notion of cloud hosted is SaaS. We talked a little bit about Salesforce. Certainly M365 is the big one. Jason, I'll let you take us through. I'm going to start with Salesforce first, just because I think we all consider Microsoft 365, and rightly so, but Salesforce shouldn't be ignored either. We've come up with a white paper around 9 reasons why you may need to back it up, but it really comes down to, it feels like, Jason, more than other SaaS-based applications, there's so many roles or different kinds of participants involved with that app.
Yeah, and the other thing is that when you just think about the business process, remember we talked about BCDR and business continuity in general. The first step in any business continuity conversation is understanding the business processes and their underlying IT dependencies. And if your business process relies on customer or partner data, you live and breathe all day long in Salesforce. I mean, that is when Salesforce is working, you're working. And when Salesforce ain't working or has bad data, you ain't working. And so this becomes that lifeblood. It all comes down to data quality and the assurance of data availability. It's a no-brainer that it should be a marquee application to be protected.
And then if we look at Microsoft 365, I'll build this out. Maybe give us 60 seconds, Jason, on a couple of these criteria here.
So the thing I love about Microsoft 365 is, again, kind of like there's not just one cloud. 365, again, is a platform. It is a suite. It includes email, includes SharePoint, includes I think our PowerPoint today is sitting in a OneDrive folder, right? So all of that is there. But however you're going to protect it, if you want to protect it from within Azure Marketplace, right? Just spin up a backup node and then back up that environment, you can. I personally run my copy of Veeam Backup for 365. I run that in my Dallas office. I have it as a VM, so I can get my data out of the cloud and have at least one copy I can put my hands on. But candidly, what I recommend for most folks, BAS. I love the idea of one cloud backing up another, and again, having smarter humans than me in charge of it. So however you want to do it, 365 data has to be backed up. Microsoft ain't, so you better.
Great point. And it would be remiss if we didn't mention cloud native, such as serverless, but especially containers. Now going on 3 years ago, Veeam did acquire what we believe is a best of breed container technology Kubernetes solution. It's actually built on container technology. To your point, cloud protecting cloud. This is containers or Kubernetes protecting Kubernetes. That bonus item that I mentioned, we've talked about 3 ways to think about cloud, but there is from the cloud. And Jason, I saw something last week, a tweet storm saying, a little controversial, like, is repatriating a polarizing word? Is it the right word? I like the results here when we simply asked, has your organization brought data back from public cloud? Not 100%, but any workload. Take us through, what was the highest response?
Yeah, so first and foremost, take a look at the 12. So that was an exclusive choice in the survey. So when 12% said we've never brought anything back on-prem, that means 88% have. Own that for a second. 7 out of 8 organizations have brought back at least some workloads back on-prem. And then we ask, okay, which one, which and why? And you get the normal ones. I had a disaster, like a spare tire. I swapped over, I came back. I had some buyer's remorse along the way. And then the last one is I dev'd in a cloud and I brought it back. Again, this goes back to that hybrid fluidity, or what Veeam calls data freedom. Put it on the right platform for the right reasons, and don't be embarrassed if the right reason happens to be on-prem, as long as your backup tool allows for that.
I love that. And yeah, that 49% said we always planned to do this. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't something that we had to pivot. It was part of our business model. So we want to thank you for joining today. We want to take you through data points that we think you can use regardless of your protection solutions. We want to tell you a little bit, of course, about our Veeam data platform overall. But be sure to check out the research. We've got a couple of the research reports in particular that we're highlighting for you for download. Thanks so much for joining. Thank you, Jason, for being a great partner. Look forward to seeing everyone on the next Trailblazer Talk.
All right. Well, thanks to Dave and Jason for walking us through all those survey results. Great data and great Trailblazer talk as always. Really appreciate their time today. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $250 Amazon gift card is Edward Trapp from California. So congratulations to Edward. We'll be in touch about your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.